So, if you are interested in cognitive computing and how it can help your startup save costs, then please head over to Samruk Kasnia room right now. We are having the luncheon with IBM from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So lunch is provided. Please do go over and check it out. So now we'd like to continue on the track of FinTech. And continuing on the theme of payments, we move on to the first panel session that revolves around FinTech. The finance technology industry is indubitably one of the most watched upon ecosystems in the global entrepreneurial circles. Now, before we introduce the moderator and the speaker session for this panel session, I know that some of you might actually have questions to ask during the panels, which is why we actually have the Pigeonhole app. So for this, just log on to pigeonhole.app/Echelon Asia, and once you're there, just type in Echelon, and you'll be able to see all the panel sessions that we have for today. And if you have any questions, just type in and ask it. And for the rest of the audience, if you see a question that you really want to be answered that someone else has already asked, just upvote it. So now let's invite our speakers on stage for the panel. This panel is moderated by Marcus, Global COO of Startup Bootcamp FinTech, and our speakers are Neil Cross, Chief Innovation Officer, DBS Bank, Sony Joy, CEO Chiller, and Bert John, Founder and CEO Dragon Belt. A big round of applause for our first panel, please. Woo, you're not that tired before lunch. Come on, a bit more enthusiasm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the FinTech panel. Great. It's good being here. Thanks a lot for having us. It's good seeing so many faces. FinTech is hot, hence so many people in the room, and apparently we are early on in the conference, so it must be a good sign that FinTech is really happening. We will have an interesting panel here today. We have Sony, Bertjan, and Neil Cross from DBS, where we get different insights from startups and from a bank what actually is happening in FinTech. Last year there was $4 billion of investment into FinTech. Already this year, the first 6 months, already $12 billion went into FinTech startups. This is a hot market, and what actually is going on? So why don't you quickly introduce yourself, do a pitch in your case, and maybe you talk a bit about DBS and what you're doing.
Sure. So I run a startup called Chiller. We are into the mobile payment space. We are a P2P app which rides on the banking layer. So essentially we are a multi-bank app which lets you do instant fund transfers directly from bank account to bank account. And P2P is obviously the start, and we are going into merchants and other modes, other use cases also very soon.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. We are Dragon Wealth, and we are the company that helps financial advisors connect better with their clients. So we are the relationship marketing and inbound marketing platform for financial advisors to reach to their prospects and reach their clients. And we are a B2B play.
You probably know who we are. We're DBS. We're very much trying to be the startup bank of Asia. We want to be the most innovative bank in Asia. And we're on a very interesting journey, I'm sure many of you have heard.
Thanks, Neil. So you are the Chief Innovation Officer. What do you actually do as a Chief Innovation Officer? What's your main task in a daily job?
Whatever I say it is, I suppose. I'm the boss, which is great. And so the number one thing I want to do, a lot of innovation teams spend time inventing products for their company. I feel the better strategy is how do we evolve the culture of DBS, and it's a much harder and a much longer journey, and to do that we look to people like you in the audience. We look for creative, smart startups, university students to come work with us in the bank, sit down in some of our programs like our hackathons or our accelerators or our incubators and help us change as an organization. What I want and what the CEO wants is to get the culture of a tech company and also hopefully get to the agility of a startup. Banking no more is just about the bank. Banking in the future and digital banking is about how a bank plays nicely in ecosystems, and one of our most important ecosystems is the startup community.
Thank you. So we all know FinTech is happening in New York and in London and in Sydney. What do you guys think is actually happening in Asia? What are the most exciting spots for you in Asia from a bank's point of view and from a startup point of view? Bertrand, you want to start?
Yeah, so Marcus, I really think about, let's say, Asia in terms of cities, actually, not in terms of countries. So I believe, let's say, there's a huge community and there's a lot of FinTech development happening at the moment in cities like Manila, in cities like Jakarta, Singapore. And if you look at these cities, these are very easy places at the moment to reach a lot of, let's say, financially quite educated clients. And because, let's say, the ratings of all these countries are coming up at the moment, you also have a large, let's say, base of clients which you can reach pretty quickly over there for as a FinTech company. Because these clients, they are just getting introduced to new financial products. They're getting, let's say, better, let's say, education, and they're also having, let's say, more money to spend on financial products. And that's where I think FinTech companies can play a big role in.
Thanks. Sonia, you're based in India.
Yeah, so we have dual offices. So we have a business team is based in Bombay and the tech team is in Cochin, which is like a sleepy, beautiful town in the south of India. So I think for us, India is too big and a massive market to immediately look at other markets right now. But going forward, I think there are a lot of other markets, especially in the Middle East as well as in the Southeast Asia, which have a lot of similarities, like, in terms of what people like, the backgrounds and the culture, and in fact, even the percentage of cash penetration. Like for example, in India, it's almost like 95%, 98% cash. Like you take the all of debit card transactions, online transactions, payment gateways, and whatnot. It's just 2 to 5%. Like that's nothing, right? So there is immense scope in India. So like I said, India is too big for us right now to look at anything else. But yeah, we are soon coming to other markets also which are similar.
Neo, do you think in Asia is a different FinTech than in London and in New York, for example? What do you see as a bank coming up, and where do you see things happening in FinTech that is maybe not happening right now in London and New York?
I think it's an interesting space here. The most exciting place in the planet for financial services at the moment, and the most scary, is China. Yeah, it's happening out here. It isn't Europe. It isn't. God, it's not the US. Yeah, you've got the world's biggest banks in China, and you've got the world's biggest e-commerce companies and tech companies, and they're going after, that mass domestic market, and the money is astronomical. I just saw that Alibaba's financial arm, Ant, got valued at around 50 billion US dollars. Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary what's happening there. What we're seeing over here is very much what happens is, people say that Asia copies the West. Well, kind of to some degree, every country copies every other country. But what they do is they improve it significantly. And you look at, Alipay is a great example, and Alibaba gone way beyond what Amazon and PayPal would ever dream of, raising, over $100 billion in funds. What we're seeing very much out this way, I think, in the FinTech space, is we're seeing some interesting stuff around cloud, which we don't tend to see in Europe, like complete banks running on cloud platforms. We're seeing a huge amount of innovation in the wealth business, and obviously out this way we get to see a lot of financial inclusion. So financial inclusion is the next FinTech, because those are the markets that in 10 years' time are going to want wealth products, they're going to want insurance products, they're going to want savings products, they're going to want lending products. For now, they just want to be able to transfer small amounts of money. That will change, yeah? The world's maturing and people are getting wealthier every year. So I think that's the massive difference out here, is there's a lot of FI, there's a huge amount of wealth here. Singapore Singapore's got the highest amount of millionaires per capita in the planet. Apparently 1 in 6 households has a millionaire. They probably just own a car. And so it's very different out here for that part of the world. The wealth is very different. The top end is very different, and the bottom end is very different.
So Bertrand, you just heard wealth is exactly your space, right? You're working in wealth management. You as a startup, how much do you need to work with the bank, and how much do you depend on the bank as being successful as a FinTech startup?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I believe, let's say, that as a startup, you have to, of course, be very careful that you don't get locked in, let's say, into enormous cycles and trying to sell something to a bank. So what we as Dragonwell do is actually the following model, is that we first try to prove, and we are proving our model and working, let's say, with all these small financial advisors throughout Asia, and really help them in reaching their clients. And then what we will do is basically take the next steps and start working with banks, and let's say the smaller banks who probably don't have their own big IT shops and their own signing up with big company names, behavior, and start working with them and prove the case towards them that we really support the end investor and bringing better value there. And then I believe that the time will come that say that banks will start working with us. But you know, I compare the situation always with, if you look at a company like Toshiba, they said about 4 years ago, they said, well, actually we don't need to work with GoPro because GoPro, you know, we will build the next GoPro ourselves. Well, unfortunately, you see at the moment that with its market valuation, GoPro could buy Toshiba. So I believe, let's say, that FinTech companies should not be too focused on only trying to work with banks. I think you will need to prove the case, and then later on, you will probably have an easier sell into banks.
Thanks. So Sony, you are working with, I think, 7 banks? Just 7 banks, it's amazing. Yeah. How did you manage, how long did it take you, why? Yeah.
So I don't technically sell to banks. It's more like partnering with banks because we're trying to build something where banks are partners. But it's hard. Like the first sale actually took us almost more than 9 to 10 months. Obviously, integration is even slower. Like, from a startup background, you expect everyone else to be like equally nimble. But it takes like 4 or 5 months for a decently deep integration to happen with the bank, which essentially means the entire cycle at around more than a year, like 12 to 14 months from the day you start something on the whiteboard to something live in the market which people can use. But what we've realized is that obviously if you make the right sale, if you have the first client which is like a marquee client, then obviously the next sale happens much faster. So I think we are talking to around 22 banks right now in India, out of which more than half a dozen banks have like signed up, and a lot many are in the process of signing up. So I think the whole trick is to actually manage the ego of the bank and so I think from a market perspective, banks have realized that unless and until they act fast and they move digitally, there is a high chance that they're going to get disrupted by someone they have not even seen, like completely outside of the spectrum will come in and just disrupt the space. Being a regulated industry like it is, especially in a country like India, they have that lead time. They can make sure that they have the right guys with them, aligned, with their interests, and their whole existence is actually protected. So I think that way startups should not see banks as a threat or as a competition. I think there is a tremendous amount of value that they can give. Like the banks I partner typically have 4,000 to 5,000 branches each. Okay, like in the length and breadth of the country. That kind of access is something that's like close to impossible for a startup to achieve ever. Like the capital will just go to waste if you try to do anything of that sort. But when you partner with banks, obviously you can go through all those channels. So I think it's a win-win deal. They learn a lot. They get a lot of advantages from what we give them, and in return, we obviously get to leverage all what they have.
Thanks. So, Nina, what would you respond then to a startup as a bank that startups in this case have 10, 9, 12 month sales cycles where cash flow is short, resources are short? How can you as a bank then nurture and help these startups to grow quicker? What can you do as a bank to help these external innovation to fit your internal innovation approach?
I sold to banks for a long part of my life, so I'm kind of used to it. Yeah, it takes a long time. The important thing really is, my job is to be that external USB, so that kind of connection point from the bank out to the world of startup, to help the startup sell into the bank. A few things we did, working obviously with Startup Bootcamp Accelerator, I gave them some hardcore sales training. I used to
very good.
Yes, it was. I used to run Microsoft's banking and insurance business, so I kind of know how to sell to banks. I think my guidance with this thing is don't let them kill you. Yeah, be very clear, be very structured in your sales approach. Look at, there's a few processes out there. Solution selling, you should learn solution selling. There's a company called Holden who have a good model. Be very clear on where you are in the process, because what can happen in a sales cycle, you could just go round and round and round and round. You're burning your time, your money with one customer when there's other customers who might buy your product. So you have to have a portfolio approach in your sales strategy to make sure you're focusing in the right place for customers who are going to buy your product. The important thing though is in selling, it's all about people. Yeah. Understand the person you're selling to. What job do they do? Do they have power? Do they have money? Even the most important thing, how do they get their bonus? Yeah. Are you going to help them get their bonus? Are you going to help them make their career? It isn't about the organization. It gets very, very personal in sales. And so my guidance is learn solution selling, try and understand who you're dealing with, but be prepared to walk away. Yeah, because you're a startup, you don't have the time and the resources. You can't. I spent 4 years selling to a bank. I did the world's biggest internet banking deal for Microsoft to Westpac in Australia. It took me 4 years. By the time the money come in, I was living in a different country in a different job. The guy who replaced me, he got a huge bonus. So it can take a lot of time, but just manage your time. Have structure in your sales process, but also act professional. It's really, really important. Yeah, banks are risk adverse. You're a startup, you represent a lot of risk, so try and mitigate that risk by acting in a very professional manner. And there's lots of guidance online around how to be a good salesperson. But it's a critical skill.
Okay, thanks Neil. Thanks a lot. Sounds good.
Can I add
Startup
a
point of
question
view?
to that?
Yeah.
So one of the biggest problems with startups face when you actually approach a bank is like, who do you approach? Like for example, there's an IT team, there's a business team, there's probably a digital transformation team, there's a business re-engineering group. So there are like all sorts of like 5 or 6 or 7 different entities, sub-entities within a bank that you can possibly talk to. Now from my experience, many a times, just talking to the wrong guy first, I wouldn't even say wrong guy, but based on the equation they have amongst themselves, it gets perceived as a wrong approach. Okay, like a business guy would say, why did you go to the IT in the first place? Like you should have come directly to me. And that one line is actually going to cost you like 6 months. Like you said, it will keep cycling and come back to the same guy, and it has to like be normalized, and then you start again. Like so from for a third party or for a startup, it's like a black box. Like the entire banking thing is one thing, but who do you approach?
Okay, so there's a few ways to look at this. What problem are you solving? Who owns that problem? So there's a concept called pain chain. Research pain chain. Have a look in Bing.com and find out who's got the pain. Yeah, if you're solving a problem for the business, you should go to the business. If it's a problem for technology, you should start with technology. It's about the people. Whose bonus is on the line, and how you're going to help them get that. One place you should. So that's my guidance with your product. It's going to be. I would assume it's a business play, unless technology have a big product. Research. Look at the annual accounts and the filings of the company you're working with. Understand this. What's the CEO saying? Is he aligning with what your product will sell to them? Are they under tech transformation? It could be that you sell to the business, but there was a news article a month earlier, the CIO saying we're going to reinvent our payment platform. And actually, you would then go to technology because they have a need, they have a project in there. I think just research, but remember, the business make the decisions, technology implement them. So that's an important thing. Find where the pain is, who's got the pain, and then sell into them.
Thanks, Neil. Before I take the questions from the floor, I've got a few more questions or thoughts around what actually is disruptive. So we hear the whole blockchain buzzwords, we hear alternative finance. Well, what do you think? Are you disruptive? Are you innovative? How would you maybe approach blockchain as a startup, as a bank? What's for you really disruptive?
Well, for me, let's say disruptive means that you start first of all thinking about, let's say, on how the client, so the investor, behaves, the ones that the banks are targeting or the financial advisor. And I believe, let's say, that if as a fintech company you can be disruptive by looking at what the changes are of that, let's say, that behavior. For example, inbound marketing. That's one of the biggest aspects at the moment that we're seeing, is that clients are trying to find you instead of you just actively, proactively pushing your message out, let's say, to an indifferentiated group of clients. So I believe, let's say, that as a company you can be disruptive by approaching your client levels, your client approaching your client engagement in a completely different way.
So for you, it's customer-centric, really being a new customer experience. That's kind of what he's trying to say.
Yeah, and also finding out where your clients are at the moment.
Yeah.
Because your clients, they are looking for references, they're checking, if you're a financial advisor, they're looking for you online, they're trying to figure out, let's say, who has given you an endorsement, they're looking for, did you write a blog post, they're looking for a certain white paper that you have published. Instead of, let's say, I live on Holland Village, and there, if you drive into Holland Village, the only thing that you see is big advertisements saying DBS, Standard Chartered, UOB. It's all great, but I mean, people are actually not looking there for you. People are looking online if you have published a good paper and to solve a problem that they have.
Neil, are you scared of blockchain?
Not particularly, no. I'm actually, to your point, funny enough, the process processes scare me more than the tech. So the fact that you can understand your customer better, that startups can pivot and execute quicker, that's the thing, that's the big change that's happening. It's not just about tech, it's about process. You know, as a bank, and I think we're quite good at this, and we're improving, we're using more lean startup, but we tend to be quite linear. We come up with an idea, we build a business case, we build maybe do an RFP, blah, blah, blah. Whereas a startup will keep pivoting, changing, spend time with customers, really understand the pain of the customer, get inside their life and have a value proposition which is way more compelling and suitable for them than we would normally offer as a big corporate. So the process is a huge thing. From a tech side, biggest thing that's going to artificial intelligence, cognitive computing, I think is going to be very, very interesting. It's the new big data. So we'll see how that pans out. Blockchain, I love blockchain. I think it's an amazing technology. I'm not a big fan of cryptocurrency, but the blockchain technology and the promise that it can deliver will have a much more value than the actual currency that's sat on top of it.
Everyone in the panel and the audience, please pick it up. Yeah, build blockchain startups, go to DBS and sell it. Yeah, good. Let's see what we have here in questions. A few people are very excited about asset management, so let's see, activate this. So what exciting developments have you seen in the asset management space? Anyone has a good answer to this? I think maybe Neil is your, or Bert-Jan?
Well, I think that the main key development you see at the moment is where will the robo-advisors go? I mean, that's a big question that you see at the moment. I mean, you've had, let's say, 2 years ago, a big trend of robo-advisors coming into the market. What you see there is that the two trends. One of them is that the engagement levels of clients with robo-advisors seems to be, let's say, still not displaying enough buying behavior. And secondly is that big players are at the moment moving into that space, offering their complete platform, like Fidelity, like BlackRock, are moving into that space. I'm quite keen to see how they are going to address these challenges.
Need any thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I was on a panel last week. I think when we see because at the moment robo-advisors are still, it feels like a piece of code. So you kind of upload all your stuff and then it does an algorithm. It feels more like an algorithm than a robot. When that converges with cognitive computing, artificial intelligence, and you can have free-form chat with a virtual robot, and then it does all the asset allocation for you, and it's a conversation, that is a huge disruption, I think.
And to add to that, I believe it's not only the algorithms and the artificial intelligence that comes in, but also the human touch again, because where people are quite good and humans are quite good, and it's really just listening better and then actually making the sale in the end. So I believe that if you enable advisors to use all the technology that you're mentioning and then making the sale, you got the best combination.
Thanks. Sony, this next question is for you. What are the biggest challenges in FinTech? I mean, it sounds all amazing, and again, it's a big movement. What are the challenges you've seen, especially with Chilla and in India, and maybe also Bert-Jan can talk a bit about what he has challenges?
I think, so it's at multiple levels, right? So the challenges, it's not like one single challenge that you'll face. Obviously, because of the regulation, you have the dependence on banks and other regulated bodies, which, like we discussed earlier, has a huge sales cycle. So which means that for a startup, unless and until you have deep pockets, you can't reach to a situation where you have a end customer or a working product. So that's obviously a big challenge. Two, I think the space is actually, heating up a lot. Like there's a lot of action, there's a lot of hype around it. There is a lot of interest from VCs, but a lot of VCs and anyone who actually puts money into this industry don't really understand what is actually the difference between startup A and startup B and startup Z. So for them or for a lot of people actually the differentiation actually looks very vague when you look at it from outside, like because typically they see very similar use cases, they see multiple startups trying to change the same thing, but when you talk to each of them, they're saying that okay, hey, my backend is like completely different from the other guys, and like all those things. So I think it's confusing for someone who is from outside of the industry. I think maybe what can add to it.
Yeah, so as a startup, you got like 10,000 biggest challenges, but I'll pick one. And the biggest challenge I see at the moment here in Singapore is recruitment. It's my biggest challenge at the moment. And I believe there's a couple of items around it. First of all, of course, startups like us, we cannot pay big cash, big money out. And that's a problem because if you're in the FinTech industry, you also need industry experts in some cases. And that's hard to compete against the big banks because they can pay way more. The equity component, what you promise, of course, to promising employees or people who want to be an employee, is not a big thing at the moment here because we have not seen the big exits here yet, like you've seen in the States, for example, where people really start valuing the equity that they get, and that leads to a kind of a misunderstanding or let's say, risk estimation about how much the equity actually can bring you. And I believe that Singapore badly needs a couple of big IPOs where people then can see what the equity component of their cash salary will bring to them, and I believe then more people will flock into startups.
Thanks, Bert-Jan. Neil, any challenges for you as a bank, besides from having startups maybe disrupting your bank one day?
So really for us, I want local fintechs, please. Singapore, stand up, yeah. Let's see some more local fintech. There's a lot of money in fintech. With the national bank, we try and work with Singapore-based companies. We're trying to do our best to grow the business in Singapore. I want to see local fintechs. Do you know the best fintechs are the ones that don't have to integrate to bank systems? As soon as you integrate to bank systems heavily, then it's complex, it's risk, it's expensive, it takes time. So I'd like to see more stuff that we can just quickly, lightweight integrate, adds value to our customers. I think that the biggest challenge, if I was setting up a fintech today, I think the biggest issue I would have really is just the noise around fintech at the moment and finding a niche. Find that niche in the market, and you've got to decide, are you a fintech which is going to, a bank could license your product and would add value to the bank, or are you going to be a fintech which is going to disrupt and potentially kill a bank? So you've got to decide which side of the fence you're going to be on with that. But I think the biggest challenge at the moment is just the amount of noise and finding the right niche and having a differentiator in this, very, very well-hyped market.
Thanks. If I can just add one more point to this, what we see a lot, Startup Bootcamp FinTech as well, is having this smart money here in Singapore and Hong Kong. In London and New York, you have a lot of investors, angels, putting money into early stage companies, giving also not just money, but also expertise and insights. And we are waiting for these bankers, experts to actually say, we put some money into the startup, seed rounds, to actually give smart money. Yeah, it's not about just having startup trying to find out their own way through the jungle. It's about actually having smart money on board early onwards. And I think you as a startup agree that it's really important to have not just your own product, but also a big advisory board around you to actually help you navigate through this. Good. One more question. This is a big one. I think we can take this actually to a discussion over a beer, but will banks be winners of successful fintech startup solutions, or will the winners always be the startups? It's a very big question. Do you have any specific thoughts on this? Do you plan to disrupt the banking world, or do you plan to work with the banking world?
So like I clarified before, so we will work with the bank. So we are partner. We are very aligned on that respect. We will continue to be, acting in the interest of the banks. But at the same time, we want to show them stuff which they haven't probably imagined at this point in time, or probably they're not using their big data, they're losing out on a lot of data. So all those things where, so you can't really say that I'm gonna just boost whatever they've been doing till date, but probably also add up a whole lot of new stuff. But if you ask me like who's going to be the winner, like in terms of like real innovation happening or disruption happening. So how does disruption happen? Disruption happens when there's a big value addition and like people perceive that value addition, and it reaches to a point where people are ready to change their behavior, like how they interact with the bank or how they interact for a particular like maybe an asset management class or whatever it is. Like so they understand that okay, maybe booking through an Airbnb and staying in a house is actually cheaper and maybe better in experience than maybe going to a hotel. So that's disruption, right? So I think if you talk about disruption in the space, it's likely to come from a non-banking entity or from a new entity or from a third party. Also because it's very important that the market is big, right? So you can't actually be linked with one bank and only looking at customers of that one bank. You have to create something which is actually a layer on top of all the banks, like, or maybe as many banks as possible, so that you're not losing out on anyone. Like this will have exceptions, obviously. Like if you're talking about maybe financial inclusion or maybe peer-to-peer lending, then you don't need banks, or provided your country doesn't have a problem with that. Like
you mentioned earlier the Bill Gates quote. Maybe that's a good way of also putting it.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm sure a lot of you would have heard that. But in '93, '94, so Gates was at a conference and he actually said that very soon there could be a scenario where banking will continue to be relevant, but banks might not. Okay, so back in those days, which is like what, probably almost 21 years back, people were like, hey, not happening, like, how can banks go out of existence? But today, especially, a lot of banks that I talk to and I interact with on a very close basis, most often, some of the conference topics that they have internally, when they do all those, internal sessions and, overview and MD's or chairman's speech and all that, this is something that gets quoted very often. So now I think banks have started realizing that, okay, something could happen, which I think is good because, you actually are waking up to the situation.
So Neil, what do you think to this? What do you respond? Like banks will be reduced to the bank infrastructure, the banking bit will be taken over by tech companies, not just startups, also the likes of Amazon, Alibaba, and so on and so on.
Winter is coming. Yeah. So there's some banks, not DBS, we're awesome. So absolutely, but I think the winner is the customer. Yeah, the customer's going to get better stuff. I draw parallels to open source software. When open source software came out, everyone said, it's going to kill all the software companies, Microsoft are gone, IBM are gone, etc. It impacted them, but then what happened is open source software catered for a part of the market that those software companies didn't go down to, the free stuff, And then those companies actually changed their perception. They started to acquire open source software companies, started to partner with them, and a lot of software companies disappeared, but quite a few survived out of that disruption. It's exactly the same. So what banks are doing now, the biggest lender on Funding Circle, which is a peer lending platform in the US, is, I think it's JP Morgan. 30% of loans are done by banks. So what's happening is there was this moment of disruption thinking that, they're going to kill all the banks, and the banks moved in and started putting their finance behind it, started using those platforms, acquiring equity in those platforms. So after this wave of disruption, the best banks will be surviving. They'll be the ones that partnered or acquired the tech companies. There'll be some big disruption. My main fear is the big guns, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebook. They're too big for a bank to buy. That's the worry, because we can buy all these tech startups, we can spend $1 billion, well, not DBS, I'm not announcing that to market, but other banks. But when Facebook and Google move in, and if they take big chunks of that market, that could lead to...
I guess that's also the reason why Alipay or this whole Ant Financials is, for me, the really only disruptive solution I see right now, because they own the customer, they own the ecosystem of the customer, lending, insurance, payments, everything. Right? So, Bertjan, the last words from a startup. Do you want to be bought by a bank, or what's your vision?
Yeah, I think that banks are typical good companies to do that. And specifically, for example, on that question there, I think that banks should also look at how are they going to attack, let's say, large markets which are not their home market. For example, for a DBS, like markets like Indonesia, how are you going to do that? And I think that working very strongly with FinTech companies that can help you acquire the client there, and then probably you acquire that FinTech company, that would be a fantastic way forward. So I believe, yes, that can happen, yes.
Great. That's almost it. Any last words? it's a very exciting space to be in. Thanks guys for having us, and any other questions, please grab us afterwards. We're going to be here the whole day. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, panel.